children. So, as we have already discussed about the tissues, we have studied that what are the tissues. We have also discussed that there is the difference between animal tissues and plant tissues. Now children, we will start with the animal tissue. Children, as I mentioned in the introduction of this lesson, that multicellularity introduced the division of labor, right? So this thing we have discussed in the introduction. Now children, what does the multicellularity means? As we are aware that multicellularity means the organisms which is made up of multiple cells, right? That means millions and billions of cells are present inside the body of organisms. So a group of cells come together and perform a specific function. Means each function is assigned to a particular type of cell, right? So this is known as division of labor. So what is division of labor? It means the entire work is divided into groups of individuals. So every group is assigned to a specific task. Okay? So this is division of labor. Now children, like plants, the body of animals is also made up of different types of tissue which perform specific functions. Okay? Children, for example, contraction and relaxation of muscle cell results in the movement of body parts, right? Blood and lymph carry substances from one part to other. Substances like food material, waste material, oxygen gas, carbon dioxide, etc. Blood and lymph carry those substances from one part to another. Talking about the nerve cells, so children, nerve cells respond to external and internal stimuli, right? So muscle, blood, lymph and nerve. So they are the example of tissues found in the animal body. Okay? Now let us try to understand what we are going to study with the help of example from human beings. Let us take the example of breathing process, which we all are aware because it happens as a part of our existence, right? Now tell me, have you ever observed that when we breathe, what happens? Yes, the chest muscles move. It is the speciality of the muscle cell that they can cause movement. Like you can feel it yourself. Try when you breathe, you actually feel that your chest portion is actually showing some movements. So, how is able to move? There is some magic which make the movement, or there are some muscles present in chest and those muscles move. So it is the speciality of the cell which make the muscle that they can cause the movement. So what happens? Children, when you breathe, the oxygen is taken in, right? Now what will happen? जैसे ही आप breathe करते हो, क्या होता है? Oxygen is taken in, right? Now this oxygen which is taken in is absorbed by the lungs. Now the lungs are what? They are the respiratory organ and are made up of by the tissues. Yes. Now children, what happened? Lungs will absorb all the oxygen and transported oxygen to all parts of the body. Now how will it transported to all part of the body? It is transported to all part of the body because every part of the body and every cell of the body need oxygen to survive. Let us suppose, children, when you breathe in oxygen, so oxygen is entered into the body. But now this oxygen stayed inside our body. Lungs will absorb oxygen. Then oxygen is transported to different parts of body by blood, right? Now blood is what? Blood is again also a kind of tissue. Because of the blood, oxygen is reached every cell of our body, right? Every part of our body get oxygen because of the blood, right? Now, what happens inside each cell? Children, inside each cell you have mitochondria. Am I right? Yes, we studied about mitochondria in the previous lessons. So mitochondria generate energy in the form of ATP, right? So mitochondria generates energy in the form of ATP molecule using this oxygen, correct? So energy generation takes place inside our body. So did you notice the role of tissue there? Let us understand by the example. Now children, when we inhale, like in the process of inhalation, what will happen? All the oxygen reached into the lungs. Now what happened? These lungs become expand, right? These lungs become expand because of the muscles, right? So the muscle which is present inside the chest, muscles are made up of tissue, and those tissue are capable of movement, right? So that is one kind of tissue named as muscular tissue, right? There you can see the role of muscular tissue, right? Okay, now oxygen is absorbed by the lungs, and lung is an organ and again made up of tissue. ये जो lungs होते हैं ये oxygen को absorb करते हैं, and again it is made up of by tissue. So there are some tissue which help in absorption. So what kind of tissue are they? Those tissue are the kind of epithelial tissue. ये जो ऑक्सीजन जो लंग्स एब्जॉर्व करते हैं वो कैसे? क्योंकि जो लंग्स होते हैं वो एपिथेलियल टिश्यू के बने होते हैं. So again, second kind of epithelial tissue. I am only trying to explain the role of animal tissue in our body, right? We will study about each kind of tissue, each type of tissue in detail, right? In the next lecture, in the next video, right? Okay, so children, lungs absorb oxygen with the help of epithelial tissue and transported that oxygen into different parts of our body, right? So in the different part of our body, the oxygen is transported through lungs. It is transported through blood. Yes, blood transports oxygen. So what is blood? Yes, the third type of tissue. Blood is a connective tissue because it connecting different parts of our body together. Now once the oxygen reached into the cell, inside each and every cell, now inside the cell there is mitochondria which generate energy in the form of ATP. Now how it generates energy? Children, what happened? It has glucose, right? And when glucose combined with oxygen, react with oxygen, it gives carbon dioxide, it gives water, and it also gives 38 molecules of ATP. So children, 38 molecules of ATP in each cell. And ATP is what? ATP is nothing but the energy. Just to tell you that they are interrelated. So with this example, I am only giving you the idea of the significance of animal tissue, right? Children, as we go ahead, we are going to discuss about the classification of animal tissue. We are going to discuss in detail about each type of animal tissue. Like, where do we find these tissue? What are the purpose of those tissues? Now, in most of the cases, I am taking the example of human body because I feel human body is something you will be able to understand in the better way, in the best way, I can say. So let us see what are the types of animal tissue. So children, broadly there are 4 types of animal tissue: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, and muscular tissue. So these are the 4 broad categories of animal tissue, right? That is epithelial, connective, muscular, and nervous. So these are the 4 broad categories of animal tissue. And we will start our discussion with the first important type of animal tissue, that is known as epithelial tissue. So let us see what is this epithelial tissue is going to be. So now we will start with epithelial tissue. So what are epithelial tissue? So children, when we talk about the epithelial tissue, so these are the protective tissue. That means they actually protect all other things. They are like outer covering. They are like protective covering. So these are the protective tissues. Now children, they are the covering of external surface, organ and cavities in a body. Can you think of the most important covering of our body, which protect everything which are present inside our body? Yes, that protective covering is what? It is skin, right? So the best and most common example which you think of the epithelial tissue is the skin. So we look at the skin, it covers all the surface of all the organ inside our body. It also acts as the protection for everything which is present inside our body. So what do you think our body is composed of? Children, our body is composed of so many delicate organs. So those delicate organs need some protection from the external environment. So the skin is actually act as covering. Skin जो है हमारे एक कवर की तरह काम करती है, क्योंकि स्किन हमारे को प्रोटेक्ट करती है हमारे एक्सटर्नल एनवायरनमेंट से. Got it? Now children, this epithelial tissue act as boundaries and keeping different body systems separate. So that means the epithelial tissue will actually, like children, it does not mean the skin is only an epithelial tissue. There are present in our body. There are a lot of other epithelial tissue which is present as well. So skin is the example of, basically we can say the skin is the classical example of the epithelial tissue, because skin act as the boundaries between the external environment and the internal body, right? So similarly, if we take the example of epithelial tissue which covers some of our internal organs, so that act as the boundary, that organs and in the other organs. So it actually acts as the boundaries and therefore keep the different body systems separate. For example, children, if we have a boundary between the lungs and the heart, this is the boundary and this is the lung and this is the heart. तो बॉडी के अंदर सारे ऑर्गन्स होते हैं, तो इसी तरीके से हमने एक एग्जांपल लिया लंग्स का और हार्ट का, राइट? सो द बाउंड्री विच सेपरेट दीज ऑर्गन, यहाँ कौन सी हम बाउंड्री की बात कर रहे हैं? So the boundary which separate these two organs, heart and lung, so it distinct the two organs, this boundary. So this boundary separates the two organs. So these are, right? So in that way it also it helps to keep the system separate. जो मैंने अभी आपसे कहा, मैंने आपसे बोला that epithelial tissue act as boundary keeping the different body systems separate. तो जिस तरीके से स्किन हमारे एक्सटर्नल एनवायरनमेंट और हमारी बॉडी के इंटरनल एनवायरनमेंट को सेपरेट रखता है ना? इट इज़ अ बाउंड्री विच कीप द डिफरेंट बॉडी सिस्टम सेपरेट. एक्सटर्नल एनवायरनमेंट और इंटरनल एनवायरनमेंट को सेपरेट रखती है स्किन। उसी तरीके से सिर्फ एक स्किन ही नहीं है एपिथेलियल टिश्यू हमारी बॉडी में, कई सारे एपिथेलियल टिश्यू है। जैसे कि हमारी बॉडी जो है किस चीज़ से मिलकर बनी है, ऑर्गन से मिलकर बनी है। अब हम एग्जाम्पल लेते हैं लंग्स का और हार्ट का। तो ये दो ऑर्गन है हमारी बॉडी में, राइट। अब ये दो ऑर्गन आपस में एक दूसरे के से सेपरेट रखे जाते हैं। इनको सेपरेट कौन करता है? एपिथेलियल टिश्यू। सो दिस इज व्हाट इट इज़ द एपिथेलियल टिश्यू। तो ये क्या करता है? हार्ट और लंग इस तरीके से बाकी सब ऑर्गन्स को भी एक दूसरे से सेपरेट रखता है ताकि वो आपस में कोलैप्स ना हो जाए, ठीक है। सो दिस इज द वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पर्पस ऑफ द एपिथेलियल टिश्यू, दैट एपिथेलियल टिश्यू एक्ट एज द बाउंड्रीज एंड कीपिंग द डिफरेंट बॉडी सिस्टम्स separate, right? Now let us talk about the another important characteristic. So these are closely packed cells forming a continuous sheet, right? So they are closely packed cell. जो एपिथेलियल टिश्यू है ये बहुत सारे सेल से मिलके बना है, टिश्यू बहुत सारे सेल से मिलके बना है और इनके जो सेल्स होते हैं वो क्लोजली पैक्ड सेल्स होते हैं। मीन्स दे हैव वेरी लेस इंटरसेलुलर स्पेस। Since the intercellular space is less, therefore the intercellular material is also less, right? Now children, the very important question that comes in our mind, why do we need the epithelial tissue? The strong boundaries, why do we need? Okay children, because they are boundaries, that is why they are closely packed, means they do not have intercellular space. इनमें intercellular space नहीं होता है, इसलिए ये strong boundaries होती हैं। Okay, let us take another example. Now children, when you build a house, you build a boundaries, right? Because boundary is one which will protect our house, correct? And we make sure that the boundaries of our house was very strong, right? Why? Because the boundary is one which is actually protecting the house, correct? So similarly, epithelial tissue act as boundaries. So we will ensure that the boundary is strong enough, and that is why the epithelial tissues are closely packed cells. That is, they do not have intercellular space. क्योंकि जो एपिथेलियल टिश्यू होता है, एपिथेलियल टिश्यू एक बाउंड्री की तरह वर्क करता है और अगर हम चाहते हैं कि हमारी बाउंड्री स्ट्रॉन्ग हो तो इसका मतलब उसमें कोई इंटरसेलुलर स्पेस ना हो। अब जैसे कि जब आप घर बनाते हैं तो उसमें आप ब्रिक्स यूज़ करते हैं। अगर ब्रिक्स इस तरीके से दूर दूर प्लेस होंगी, इनके बीच में ये इंटर स्पेस होगा तो क्या होगा? ये दीवार, ये बाउंड्री जल्दी से टूट जाएगी। तो हम लोग क्या करते हैं, ये जो स्पेस है इस स्पेस में हम लोग सीमेंट को फिल कर देते हैं टू मेक आवर बाउंड्री मोर स्ट्रॉन्ग, राइट? ताकि जो हमारी आउटर प्रोटेक्टिव कवरिंग है, आउटर प्रोटेक्टिव बाउंड्री हमारे हाउस की, वो ज़्यादा स्ट्रॉन्ग हो। तब हम क्या करते हैं, उसका इंटरसेलुलर स्पेस जो है वो ख़त्म कर देते हैं। इंटर स्पेस जो है हम वहाँ पे सीमेंट लगा के ख़त्म करते हैं ताकि हमारी बाउंड्री स्ट्रॉन्ग हो। तो उसी तरीके से जब हम बात करते हैं एपिथेलियल टिश्यू की, तो एपिथेलियल टिश्यू में इंटरसेलुलर स्पेस नहीं होता। वो इसलिए नहीं होता क्योंकि आउटर प्रोटेक्टिव कवरिंग होती है हमारी बॉडी की, जो एक बाउंड्री की तरह वर्क करती है। नाउ चिल्ड्रन, टेल मी, what would happen if they had intercellular space? Let us suppose if there are intercellular spaces, there is a good amount of possibilities that the boundary would be leaking. That means the boundary which is made up of epithelial tissue which have leaks here and there. Now what will happen? If you have leaks here and there, let us visualize in this way. Okay, let us take the example of a skin. Again, we are taking the example of a skin. Now children, the skin is completely covers our body, right? Suppose if we would have leaks in between the skin, then what will happen? The fluids the blood, all the things which are inside our body, they might be come out at any time, right? That would be so yucky. That means the fluid, the waste material, the blood, the lymph, whichever is flowing inside our body suddenly came out easily. So that is why it is very important that epithelial tissue act as boundaries, and in order to be a good boundary, they should be closely packed with very less intercellular spaces, so that there is very less intercellular material, right? So this is the brief description of the epithelial tissue, which is that they act as the covering tissue, they act as the protective tissue, they are the covering of external surface, organs and cavities of body, they act as the boundary by keeping the different body systems separate, they are very closely packed cells, right? They are very closely packed cell, that is why they form a continuous sheet. And right children, now children, another one important thing is that about the epithelial tissue, that no blood vessels within this tissue, right? epithelial tissue में कोई blood vessels नहीं होती. Now what would happen if there is blood vessels inside the tissue? That means, again, let us taking the example of a skin. Okay children, because the skin is something which is visible to us, that we can visualize in a better way. तभी जब भी epithelial tissue का example ले रही हूँ, मैं skin ले रही हूँ, क्योंकि skin एक external organ है. We can easily visualize this skin. हम internal organs को नहीं देख पा रहे, तो epithelial tissue का वहाँ कैसे example दें, इसलिए बार बार skin का example ले रही हूँ. Let us suppose children, if you would have had blood vessels inside the skin, not inside the skin, within the skin, right? Skin के अंदर, inside नहीं, skin के within the skin, in between the skin, the epithelial tissue. If you would have blood vessels, so in that case what would happen? अगर skin के in between blood vessels होंगी तो क्या होगा? Let us suppose somebody pushed you and hurts you, right? So you will start bleeding. If your hand hits a hard object, right? Now what happens? You feel hurt. It does not start bleeding at once. It only starts when it hurts inside the skin. So if you have blood vessels in your skin, then what happens? Even your hand or skin is get hit by anything, it start bleeding at once. It start bleeding on and off, more reasons. So we do not want such conditions. So that is why epithelial tissue does not have any kind of blood vessels, right? So I hope that you understand the characteristics of epithelial tissue. So in the next video we will discuss about the structure of epithelial tissue. Children, if you have any query, any doubt, so just feel free to ask. Till then, have a nice day and thank you.